No man dared step into that saloon until she kicked the doors open and took over the morning sun, painted the Kansas prairie in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the modest homestead where Eleanor Ellie Blackwood tended to her garden. Her calloused hands worked the soil with practiced ease, planting seeds that would bloom come spring, seeds she would never see grow. At 28, Ellie had built a life of quiet contentment with her husband Thomas and their 7-year-old daughter, Mary. The small ranch wasn't much, but it was theirs, carved from the unforgiving frontier through years of backbreaking work and unwavering determination. Thomas worked as the town's blacksmith, his strong arms shaping iron as gently as they held their daughter each night. Mary, with her mother's fierce green eyes and her father's easy smile, was the light that made every hardship worthwhile. "Mama, look!" Mary called from the porch, holding up a wooden doll Thomas had carved for her birthday. "Papa made her hair just like yours." Ellie smiled, wiping dirt from her hands onto her apron. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. What will you name her?" "Hope," Mary declared, with the certainty only a child could possess. "Because Papa says we should always have hope." The irony of that moment would haunt Ellie for the rest of her days. It was past noon when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Ellie shaded her eyes, watching as 5 riders approached. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the garden fence, but she relaxed when she recognized the lead rider's distinctive black hat with its silver band. Jake Morrison, owner of the Broken Wheel Saloon and the most powerful man in Perdition County. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Morrison tipped his hat, though his smile never reached his cold grey eyes. "Fine day for gardening." "Mr. Morrison?" Ellie nodded, her grip tightening on the rifle. "What brings you out this way?" Morrison dismounted, his spurs jangling against the hard-packed earth. His 4 companions remained on their horses, hands resting casually on their gun belts. Among them was Morrison's enforcer, a scarred brute named Silas Crow, whose reputation for cruelty was legendary, even in a land where violence was commonplace. "I'll cut to the chase, ma'am. I'm expanding my operations, and I need your husband's shop. The location is perfect for my new establishment, a proper gentleman's club, you might say." Ellie's jaw tightened. "The smithy isn't for sale, Mr. Morrison. You know that." "Everything's for sale at the right price." Morrison pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. $500, more than fair for that little shack. "The answer is no." Morrison's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "Your husband's already refused me twice. I thought perhaps a woman's sensibility might prevail. Think of your daughter's future, Mrs. Blackwood. That money could buy her a proper education back east. Mary's future is here, with her family and her father's honest work. Now I'll ask you to leave." The saloon owner's eyes hardened to flint. "I'm disappointed, Mrs. Blackwood, I truly am. I pride myself on being a reasonable man, but my patience has limits." He mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression that made her blood run cold. "Tell your husband he has until week's end to reconsider. After that, well, accidents happen on the frontier, tragic ones." As the riders departed, Ellie noticed Silas Crow looking back, his scarred face twisted in a leer that made her skin crawl. She waited until they were out of sight before allowing her hands to tremble. That evening, as the family gathered for supper, Ellie told Thomas about Morrison's visit. Her husband's face darkened with each word, his massive hands clenching into fists that could bend iron. "That bastard thinks he owns this town," Thomas growled. "Well, he doesn't own us." Thomas, maybe we should consider—" "No." His voice softened as he reached across the table to take her hand. "I know you're scared, Ellie, but if we give in to men like Morrison, we might as well pack up and head back east. This is our home. We've bled for it, sweated for it. I'll be damned if I'll let some whiskey-peddling snake take it from us." Mary looked between her parents with worried eyes. "Is the bad man going to hurt us, Papa?" Thomas's expression gentled as he ruffled his daughter's hair. "No, little one. Your papa's strong, remember? Strong as the iron I work with. No one's going to hurt our family. But Thomas Blackwood, for all his strength and courage, had never truly understood the depths of evil that men like Jake Morrison could sink to. He believed in the law, in justice, in the basic decency of his fellow man. These beliefs would cost him everything. 3 days passed in tense normalcy. Thomas worked his forge, the ring of hammer on anvil a familiar rhythm in the small town of Perdition. Ellie tended her garden and kept Mary close, her rifle always within reach. The townspeople whispered and watched, sensing the storm brewing between the humble blacksmith and the powerful saloon owner. On the 4th night, Ellie woke to the smell of smoke. "Fire!" someone screamed in the distance. "The smithy's burning!" Thomas leaped from bed, pulling on his boots. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his gun belt. "Lock the door behind me." "Thomas, wait!" But he was already gone, running toward the orange glow that lit up the night sky. Ellie dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she loaded the rifle. "Mary, get under the bed and don't come out until Mama says so." "Mama, I'm scared." "I know, baby, just do as I say." Ellie kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting her own fear like copper on her tongue. "Everything's going to be all right." She stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, scanning the darkness. The smithy was fully engulfed, flames licking at the sky like the tongues of demons. She could see Thomas's silhouette against the fire, frantically trying to save what he could. Then she saw them, riders, moving through the shadows like wraiths. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Silas Crow's hulking form. "Thomas!" she screamed, "behind you!" But her warning came too late. The crack of a rifle split the night, and Thomas crumpled to the ground. Ellie's scream tore from her throat as she raised her own rifle, but strong hands grabbed her from behind, wrenching the weapon away. "Well, well," Morrison's voice purred in her ear. "Mrs. Blackwood, I did warn you about tragic accidents." She fought like a wildcat, clawing and biting, but Morrison's men were too many and too strong. They dragged her to where Thomas lay gasping in the dirt, blood pooling beneath him. "Ellie," he wheezed, reaching for her with a trembling hand. She broke free long enough to cradle his head in her lap. "I'm here, my love. I'm here. Mary, she's safe. She's hidden." Thomas's eyes, already glazing with death, filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I should have listened." "Shh, don't talk. Save your strength." But they both knew it was too late. With his last breath, Thomas Blackwood whispered, "Protect her." Morrison stood over them, lighting a cigar with casual indifference. "Touching, really. But I'm afraid this little drama isn't over yet." He nodded to his men. "Check the house." "No!" Ellie lunged for Morrison, her nails raking across his face, drawing blood. He backhanded her viciously, sending her sprawling in the dirt. "Bitch!" He touched his cheek, examining the blood on his fingers. "You'll pay for that! Silas, bring the girl!" Ellie's world shattered as she heard Mary's terrified screams from the house. Silas emerged, carrying her daughter, who kicked and struggled in his massive arms. "Mama, Mama!" "Let her go," Ellie begged, crawling on her knees. "Please, she's just a child. Take me instead." Morrison considered this, puffing his cigar thoughtfully. "You know, I might have done just that. But you had to go and mark my face." He touched his bleeding cheek again. "Can't have people thinking Jake Morrison's gone soft. Bad for business." What happened next would be burned into Ellie's memory forever, each detail etched in acid. Morrison's men held her down, forced her to watch as they... Mary's screams echoed across the prairie until they suddenly, horribly stopped. When it was over, when the monsters had taken their fill of cruelty, Morrison stood over Ellie's broken form. She lay in the dirt, her dress torn, her body bruised, her spirit shattered, but somehow, impossibly still breathing. "Kill her," Silas suggested, reloading his pistol. "No," Morrison smiled coldly. "Death would be a mercy. Let her live with this. Let her remember what happens to those who defy Jake Morrison." He knelt beside her, gripping her chin roughly. "Your husband's smithy will make a fine addition to my empire, and every time you see my new establishment, you'll remember this night. You'll remember the price of saying no to me." They left her there, broken and bloodied beside the bodies of her husband and child. The smithy burned through the night, sending smoke and ash into the star-filled sky like a funeral pyre for her former life. Ellie lay in the dirt for hours, her mind fracturing and reforming, breaking and rebuilding. The woman who had planted seeds that morning, who had smiled at her daughter's wooden doll, who had loved her husband with quiet devotion, that woman died in the dust of perdition. What crawled from that dirt as the sun rose was something else entirely. Something forged in the fires of loss and tempered in the blood of innocence. Something that had only one purpose left in this world: vengeance. As the morning sun revealed the full horror of the night's events, Ellie Blackwood made a promise to the corpses of her family, to the God who had abandoned her, to the very dust of the frontier itself. Jake Morrison and every man who rode with him would pay. She would paint the streets of perdition red with their blood. She would become the devil they had created, the nightmare they had birthed through their cruelty. And when she was done, when the last of them lay gasping in the dirt as Thomas had, only then would she allow herself to die. The woman was gone. The weapon remained, and hell itself would tremble at what she would become. Chapter 2. Blood Moon Rising 6 months. That's how long it took for Ellie Blackwood to transform from a broken woman into an instrument of vengeance. 6 months of sleeping in caves and abandoned shacks, of eating rattlesnake and prairie dog, of learning skills no decent woman should know. The first month nearly killed her. After burying Thomas and Mary with her bare hands in the garden where she'd planted seeds, Ellie had walked into the wilderness with nothing but the torn dress on her back and her husband's Colt 45 pried from his cold fingers. She wanted to die, welcomed the thought of joining her family. But every time she put the gun to her temple, she heard Mary's screams and Thomas's dying words, "Protect her." She had failed to protect her daughter in life. She would avenge her in death. An old Apache woman found her half dead by a stream, delirious with fever and infection from her untreated wounds. Why the woman helped her, Ellie never knew. Perhaps she recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had lost everything to the white man's cruelty. The Apache, who called herself Crow Woman, nursed Ellie back to health in her hidden canyon dwelling. "You seek death," Crow Woman observed one night, her ancient eyes reflecting the firelight. "But death rejects you. The spirits have other plans." "I seek vengeance," Ellie corrected, her voice hoarse from screaming in her nightmares. "Same thing," the old woman shrugged. "But if you must walk this path, walk it well. A wounded deer makes easy prey for wolves." Under Crow Woman's tutelage, Ellie learned to move silently through the desert, to track men like animals, to kill quickly and quietly with blade and bullet. The old woman taught her which plants could heal and which could kill, how to read the land like a book, how to become one with the shadows. "Your enemies are many," Crow Woman said, mixing a paste of sacred herbs. "You must become more than many. You must become fear itself." Ellie's body changed during those months. The soft curves of motherhood melted away, replaced by lean muscle and sinew. Her hands, once gentle enough to coax life from soil, became instruments of death. She practiced with Thomas's gun until she could draw and fire faster than a rattlesnake strike, until she could put 6 bullets through a playing card at 50 paces. But the most profound change was in her eyes. The warm green that Thomas had loved turned cold as winter jade, holding depths that made hardened killers look away. On the night of the blood moon, Crow Woman performed a ceremony. She painted Ellie's face with sacred symbols, burned sage and sweetgrass, and chanted in her ancient tongue. "The woman you were is dead," she intoned. "What rises now is justice incarnate, vengeance given form. You are the storm that comes for those who sow evil. You are the reckoning." Ellie felt something shift inside her that night, as if her very soul had been reforged. When she looked in the cracked mirror Crow Woman kept, she didn't recognize the creature staring back. Good. Eleanor Blackwood was dead. What remained had no name, only purpose. She left Crow Woman's canyon as the blood moon set, carrying new weapons along with Thomas's Colt, a Winchester rifle, a Bowie knife, and knowledge more dangerous than any blade. The old woman's parting gift was a warning. "Vengeance is a hungry god," Crow Woman said. "It will devour you as surely as those you hunt. When your work is done, nothing will remain." "Then nothing is what I'll become," Ellie replied, and rode into the darkness. Her first kill came 2 weeks later in a flyspeck town called Bitter Creek. She'd been tracking one of Morrison's men, a rat-faced gunman named Pete Sawyer, who'd held her arms while it happened. She found him in a whorehouse, drunk and boasting about his exploits. Ellie waited in his room, hidden in the shadows behind the door. When Sawyer stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and cheap perfume, she struck. The Bowie knife slid between his ribs like it was coming home, puncturing his lung so he couldn't scream. "Remember me, Pete," she whispered, as he gasped like a landed fish, blood frothing on his lips. His eyes widened in terror as recognition dawned. You're supposed to be dead? Broken? Gone mad with grief?" Ellie twisted the knife, feeling his life pulse out around the blade. "I am all those things. And I'm your judgment." She left him there, pinned to the floor with his own wanted poster stuffed in his mouth, the first name on her list crossed off in blood. Word spread quickly through the territory. Pete Sawyer found dead, killed by a woman who matched the description of the blacksmith's widow. But surely that couldn't be right. That woman was broken, destroyed, probably dead in a ditch somewhere. This had to be someone else, some drifter whore who'd robbed poor Pete. Jake Morrison heard the news in his opulent office above the Broken Wheel Saloon, now expanded to include the lot where Thomas's smithy once stood. He laughed it off, sipping imported whiskey from crystal glasses. "Pete always was careless with whores," he told Silas Crow. "Probably refused to pay, and she gutted him for it." But Silas, whose instincts had kept him alive through dozens of killings, felt a chill run down his scarred spine. "What if it's her? The blacksmith's woman," Morrison scoffed. "I saw what you boys did to her. Hell, I ordered it. No woman comes back from that." "Maybe," Silas muttered, unconsciously touching his gun. "Maybe not." The second killing confirmed their fears. Dutch Williams, found in an outhouse with his throat cut and his manhood stuffed in his mouth. The third, Cesar Valdez, discovered hanging from a tree with "murderer of children" carved into his chest. Each death more brutal than the last, each bearing a woman's touch, precise, personal, passionate. Morrison's empire began to feel the strain. Men refused to ride alone. Whispers filled the saloons and brothels of Perdition County. They called her the widow's ghost, the black angel, the woman who wouldn't die. Some said she'd made a deal with the devil himself, trading her soul for the power to avenge her family. They weren't entirely wrong. Ellie moved through the territory like smoke, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. She'd learned patience from Crow Woman, strategy from watching wolves hunt. She didn't just kill Morrison's men, she terrorized them first, left tokens at their camps, a child's wooden doll, a woman's torn dress, a blacksmith's hammer. Let them know death was coming, let fear eat at them like acid. By the 4th month, she'd killed 7 of the 12 men who'd been there that night. Each death brought her closer to Morrison, tightening the noose of fear around his neck. His business suffered as men quit rather than face the widow's ghost. Even hardened killers have limits, and being hunted by a vengeful spectre crossed most of them. Morrison tried everything. He hired trackers who found nothing but shadows. He posted guards who fell asleep and woke to find death tokens beside them. He even tried to negotiate, sending word through the criminal underground that he'd pay $10,000 for a truce. Ellie's response was to nail the messenger's ears to Morrison's saloon door with a note, "No amount of gold can buy back the dead." It was during this time that Ellie discovered something that changed everything. In the saddlebags of one of her victims, she found documents, land deeds, contracts, correspondence. Morrison wasn't just a saloon owner with ambitions. He was part of something bigger, a syndicate buying up land across the territory through murder and intimidation. Thomas and Mary had died not just for a building, but as part of a larger pattern of death and theft. The revelation filled her with new fury. Her family wasn't special to these men, wasn't even particularly important. They were just obstacles, removed with the casual cruelty of stepping on ants. The personal had become political, and Ellie's vengeance expanded to encompass not just her own loss, but the losses of dozens of families across the frontier. She began leaving survivors, wounded but alive, carrying messages back to Morrison. "You created me," one gasped out, clutching the stump where his trigger finger used to be. "She said you created her, and now she's coming to uncreate you." The showdown everyone knew was coming began to take shape. Morrison fortified the broken wheel, turning it into a fortress. He brought in gunfighters from across the territory, promising them riches to stand against one woman. The town of Perdition held its breath, caught between a tyrant and a ghost. On the night before she would ride into Perdition, Ellie made camp in the ruins of her old home. The garden had gone to seed, wild and untended. She knelt at the graves of her husband and daughter, placing wildflowers she'd picked along the trail. "I'm almost done," she whispered to the wooden crosses. "Morrison and 4 others, then I can rest." The wind whispered through the ruins, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she heard Mary's laughter, Thomas's strong voice. But it was only the wind, and she was only a weapon pretending to be a woman. She spent that last night preparing, cleaned and loaded every weapon, sharpened her knives until they could split a hair. Most importantly, she prepared herself mentally for what was to come. She might die tomorrow, probably would die tomorrow. Morrison had an army. She was one woman, but she was one woman with nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than any army. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky the color of blood, Ellie Blackwood saddled her horse for the last time. She dressed in black leather and dark cloth, her weapons hidden but ready. Around her neck, she wore Mary's little wooden doll on a leather cord, the only softness she allowed herself. The time for shadows and stealth was over. Today, she would walk through the front door of the Broken Wheel Saloon and call out Jake Morrison in front of God and everybody. Today, the widow's ghost would become flesh and blood and fury. Today, one way or another, it would end. She rode toward Perdition as the sun climbed higher, her shadow stretching long and dark across the land. Behind her lay 6 months of transformation, of learning to be death incarnate. Ahead lay either vengeance or oblivion. Ellie Blackwood no longer cared which. Chapter 3. The Devil's Due. The town of Perdition had seen its share of killers ride down Main Street, but nothing quite like the spectre that appeared that October morning. Word spread faster than wildfire. She's here. The widow's ghost is here. And folks scrambled for cover like roaches when the lights come on. Ellie rode slow and steady, her black duster coat billowing behind her like wings of judgment. The few brave souls who peered through windows saw a woman transformed by grief into something otherworldly. Her face, once soft with maternal warmth, had become a mask of terrible purpose. Those green eyes that used to sparkle with life now burned with cold fire. The Broken Wheel Saloon squatted at the end of Main Street like a cancerous growth, its gaudy facade a mockery of the simple smithy it had replaced. Morrison had spared no expense in his expansion. Carved mahogany doors, stained glass windows depicting scenes of debauchery, and a sign proclaiming it the finest establishment west of the Mississippi. Ellie dismounted in front of the saloon, her spurs ringing against the wooden sidewalk like funeral bells. She could feel eyes on her from every window, could sense the guns trained on her from Morrison's hired killers. Let them watch, let them aim. She'd come too far to care about bullets now. The saloon doors, those famous doors that no decent person dared enter, stood before her like the gates of hell itself. Through the windows, she could see shapes moving, men taking positions. Morrison had turned his den of sin into a fortress, and she was about to lay siege with nothing but will and lead. Inside the broken wheel, Jake Morrison sat at his private table, surrounded by the best guns money could buy. 15 men, each worth their weight in blood. Among them sat Silas Crow and the last 3 men who'd been there that night. Big Tom Garrett, Preacher Jones, and a half-breed killer called Scorpion. "Steady, boys," Morrison said, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning cool. "She's just one woman who's killed 8 of us," Big Tom muttered, checking his scattergun for the 10th time. "Because you let her catch you alone, drunk or stupid," Morrison snapped. "We're ready for her now. Soon as she walks through that door, cut her down. Simple as that." But nothing about Ellie Blackwood was simple anymore. She stood before those doors for a long moment, remembering Thomas's laugh, Mary's smile, the life they'd built, and the dreams they'd shared. Then she let those memories fuel the rage that had kept her alive, let them transform into purpose. With one fluid motion, she kicked the doors open. The batwing doors exploded inward with such force they nearly came off their hinges. Ellie stood silhouetted in the doorway, morning light streaming around her like she'd brought the sun itself as backup. "Jake Morrison!" Her voice rang out like thunder. "I've come for what's owed." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The hired guns, hardened killers all, found themselves frozen by the sheer presence of her. This wasn't the broken woman they'd heard about, the grieving widow their bosses had destroyed. This was something else, something that belonged more to nightmare than to the waking world. Morrison recovered first. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with false courtesy, "I heard you were dead." "I am dead." Ellie stepped into the saloon, her coat swirling. "You killed me 6 months ago. What stands before you is just the echo, come to collect the devil's due. You're outnumbered 15-1, Silas Crow growled, his hand hovering over his pistol. "You think you can take us all?" Ellie's smile was terrible to behold. "I don't think, Mr. Crow, I know. You see, you made one mistake that night. You left me alive. And worse." Her hand moved to the wooden doll at her throat. "You gave me nothing left to lose." "Take her!" Morrison screamed. The saloon erupted in gunfire. Ellie moved like liquid death, diving behind the bar as 15 guns roared in unison. Bottles exploded in showers of glass and whiskey, the mirror behind the bar spiderwebbing into 1,000 fractures. She came up firing, Thomas's Colt speaking with deadly precision. Her first shot took a hired gun through the eye, dropping him like a puppet with cut strings. The second punched through another's throat, sending him gurgling to the floor. She rolled as shotgun pellets chewed through the bar where she'd been, came up behind a poker table, and put 2 more bullets into 2 more men. 4 down in as many seconds. "Flank her!" Morrison roared, flipping his own table for cover. But Ellie was already moving, using the saloon's layout, which she'd memorized from the bodies of men she'd killed, to her advantage. She ghosted between overturned tables and scattered chairs, each appearance marked by the bark of gunfire and the fall of another man. Preacher Jones tried to get clever, circling around to catch her from behind. He found her waiting, the Bowie knife sliding between his ribs before he could cry out. She left him bleeding out on the floor, his Bible clutched in dying hands, trying to pray through punctured lungs. "The bitch is a devil!" someone screamed. "No," Ellie corrected, putting a bullet through his heart. "I'm worse. I'm a mother's rage given form." The battle raged for minutes that felt like hours. Ellie took hits. A bullet creased her ribs. Another punched through her shoulder. Buckshot peppered her left arm. But she didn't slow, couldn't slow. Pain was nothing compared to what she'd already endured. Big Tom Garrett made a break for the door, his courage failing as he watched his comrades fall like wheat before a scythe. Ellie's Winchester, grabbed from a dead man, boomed once. Big Tom stumbled, looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, and collapsed in the doorway. "You brought this on yourself, Morrison," Ellie called out, reloading behind an overturned faro table. "You could have left us alone. We were nothing to you. You were in my way." Morrison fired wildly over his barricade. Progress demands sacrifice. Then sacrifice yourself. She came over the table like an avenging angel, guns blazing. Morrison's remaining men fired desperately, but fear made their aim wild. Ellie's aim, forged in 6 months of practice and tempered by rage, was true. When the gun smoke cleared, only 4 men remained standing in the Broken Wheel Saloon: Morrison, Silas Crow, Scorpion, and Ellie herself. The floor was slick with blood, littered with bodies and broken glass. The fancy chandelier hung at a crazy angle, half its crystals shot away. "It's over, Morrison," Ellie said, blood running down her arm, her shoulder on fire. "Your empire dies today." "Does it?" Morrison smiled, and for the first time, Ellie felt a flicker of uncertainty. "Scorpion, if you would." The half-breed killer moved faster than Ellie thought possible, his knife flying from his hand. She twisted, but not fast enough. The blade sank into her thigh, dropping her to one knee. "You think I'm the only one?" Morrison stood, confidence returning. "You stupid bitch. I'm part of something bigger than your petty revenge fantasy. Kill me, and 10 more will take my place. The railroad consortium, the cattle barons, the mining companies, we're the future, and you're just a ghost of the past." Ellie gritted her teeth, pulling the knife from her leg. "Then I'll kill them too." "With what army?" Silas Crow advanced, his massive frame blocking out the light. "You're bleeding out, woman, it's finished." But Ellie Blackwood had one last card to play. From her coat, she pulled a bundle of dynamite, taken from a mining camp weeks ago, saved for just such a moment. "With this army," she said, striking a lucifer match against the floor. Morrison's eyes widened in horror. "You'll kill yourself too." "I told you." Ellie lit the fuse, the spark reflecting in her cold green eyes. "I'm already dead. The only question is how many of you I take with me." "Run!" Morrison screamed, all pretense of courage evaporating. But there was nowhere to run. Ellie had positioned herself between them and the door, the fuse burning down with terrible inevitability. Scorpion tried to rush her, and she put her last bullet through his chest. Silas Crow actually made it 2 steps before the Winchester's butt caught him in the temple, sending him crashing into the bar. Morrison fell to his knees, his expensive suit soaked with other men's blood. "Please," he begged, "I have money. I can make you rich." "You already made me rich," Ellie said, the fuse burning shorter. "Rich in purpose, rich in hate. I'm sorry for what we did." "No," Ellie shook her head. "You're sorry you're about to die. There's a difference." The fuse had almost reached the dynamite. Morrison sobbed, Silas groaned on the floor, and Ellie closed her eyes, ready to join her family. Then through the shattered windows came a sound that made her eyes snap open. Horses, many horses, and a voice calling out with authority. "This is Federal Marshal John Hawthorne. Everyone in that saloon, throw down your weapons and come out with your hands high." Ellie looked at the dynamite, at Morrison cowering before her, at the door where salvation, or at least delay, waited. For a moment, she considered letting the fuse burn, ending it all in fire and thunder. But something, perhaps Mary's voice in her memory, or Thomas's sense of justice, made her pinch out the fuse with bloody fingers. "Looks like you get to face a different kind of justice, Morrison," she said, tossing the dynamite aside. Federal marshals flooded the saloon, taking in the carnage with professional eyes. Marshal Hawthorne himself, a grizzled veteran with eyes like flint, surveyed the scene. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "What happened here?" "Justice," Ellie said simply, then collapsed as her wounds finally claimed their due. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Morrison screaming about his rights, his connections, his importance. But beneath it all, she heard something else, the whisper of satisfaction from 2 graves back in a ruined garden, telling her it was enough, for now. Chapter 4. When hell came to breakfast, Ellie woke to sunlight and the smell of carbolic acid. For a moment she thought she was dead, finally reunited with Thomas and Mary in whatever came after. Then pain crashed through her like a freight train, and she knew she still walked among the living. "Easy there," A woman's voice said, "You've been shot, stabbed, and generally perforated more than any person has a right to survive." Ellie's eyes focused on a middle-aged woman in a nurse's apron, her face kind but marked by years of frontier hardship. Beyond her, through a window, Ellie could see iron bars. "Where?" "Federal custody, Fort Smith," the nurse said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Marshal Hawthorne had you brought here after what the newspapers are calling the Broken Wheel Massacre." Memory flooded back. The saloon, the gunfight, Morrison on his knees. Morrison, is he alive and in custody, along with Silas Crowe? They're both singing like canaries, trying to save their necks from the noose. The nurse checked Ellie's bandages with gentle efficiency. "Turns out you kicked over quite the anthill, Mrs. Blackwood. The marshal's been waiting for you to wake up." As if summoned, Marshal John Hawthorne entered the makeshift hospital room. He was a tall man, weathered by years of chasing outlaws across unforgiving territory, with eyes that had seen too much but still held a spark of justice. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, pulling up a chair, "I've been wanting to meet the woman who single-handedly took down the Morrison syndicate." "I didn't take down anything," Ellie said, her voice hoarse. "I just wanted the men who killed my family." "Well, you got them. And in doing so, you exposed a criminal conspiracy that reaches all the way to Washington." Hawthorne pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Morrison's been talking non-stop, trying to cut a deal. Names, dates, bribes, murders. He's giving us everything." "I don't care about conspiracies. Are the men who were there that night dead?" Hawthorne consulted his papers. "8 dead by your hand before the saloon. 4 more in the saloon itself. Morrison and Crowe in custody. That's all 14 who participated in—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In the murders of Thomas and Mary Blackwood." Ellie closed her eyes, feeling something inside her finally unclench. It was done. They were dead, or facing the noose. Her promise to her family was kept. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment. "By rights, you should hang. 12 counts of murder, even in pursuit of vengeance, is still murder in the eyes of the law." "I know, but," the marshal continued, "there are complications. Every man you killed was wanted for other crimes. The witnesses to your family's murder have come forward now that Morrison's power is broken. The whole territory is calling you a hero." "I'm no hero. I'm a killer." "Maybe, but you're a killer who exposed a conspiracy that's led to 43 arrests across 3 states. Railroad executives, territorial judges, even a senator." Hawthorne leaned back. "The Attorney General himself is involved now. They're offering you a deal." Ellie's eyes snapped open. "What kind of deal?" "Full pardon for all crimes committed in pursuit of your vengeance, on 2 conditions. First, you testify against Morrison and his associates. Second, you leave the territory and never return." "And if I refuse, then you hang beside Morrison and Crowe." Ellie stared at the ceiling, thinking. She'd expected to die in that saloon, welcomed it even. Living hadn't been part of the plan. What did a weapon do when its purpose was fulfilled? "There's something else," Hawthorne said, his voice gentler. "We found documents in Morrison's safe. Your husband wasn't the first to refuse him, and your family wasn't the first to pay the price. There are other widows, other orphans, who are alive today because you stopped him. That doesn't bring back Thomas and Mary. No, it doesn't, but maybe it means their deaths weren't entirely meaningless." Over the following weeks, as Ellie's body slowly healed, she wrestled with the decision. Part of her wanted to refuse, to die and be done with it all. But another part, a part that sounded suspiciously like Thomas, whispered that she had a duty to see this through. The trial was a sensation. Newspaper reporters from as far as New York came to cover it. The courtroom was packed every day as Ellie, dressed in the simple black dress the marshal's wife had provided, testified in a clear, steady voice about what had been done to her family and what she had done in return. Morrison tried to paint her as a deranged killer, a madwoman consumed by bloodlust. But when Ellie spoke of finding her daughter's body, of holding her dying husband, even hardened court officials wept. When she described learning to track and kill, transforming from mother to monster, the crowd hung on every word. "I became what they made me," she said on the final day of testimony. "They wanted to break me, to make me an example of what happens to those who resist. They succeeded, but not in the way they intended. I became an example, all right, an example of what happens when you take everything from someone, when you leave them with nothing but rage and the skills to express it." Morrison and Crowe were found guilty on all counts. Both were sentenced to hang, along with 6 other members of the conspiracy. As they were led away, Morrison caught Ellie's eye. "This isn't over," he screamed. "You think you've won? There are others. They'll come for you." "Let them come," Ellie said quietly. "I've got nothing left to lose." But that wasn't entirely true anymore. During the trial, she'd received letters, dozens of them, from people across the territory. Families who'd lost loved ones to Morrison's syndicate, thanking her. Women who'd been brutalized by his men, calling her a hero. Children who'd been orphaned, saying her story gave them hope that justice was possible. One letter in particular stuck with her. It was from a young woman named Sarah, whose husband had been killed for refusing to sell his farm. "I wanted to die," Sarah wrote. "I wanted to follow my William into the grave. But then I heard about you, about what you did. If you could survive and fight back, maybe I can survive too. Maybe I can make something of the life those bastards left me. Thank you for showing me that broken doesn't mean beaten." The morning of Morrison's execution, Ellie stood in her room at the boarding house, packing the few belongings she'd acquired. The marshal had kept his word. She was free to go, as long as she never returned to the territory. A knock at the door interrupted her. It was Hawthorne, holding a leather satchel. "Your guns," he said, "cleaned and oiled. Figured you might want them." Ellie took Thomas's Colt, feeling its familiar weight. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted. "For 6 months, all I thought about was killing them. Now that it's done, now you live," Hawthorne said simply. "It won't be easy. What you've been through, what you've done, it changes a person. But you're still breathing, and that means you've got choices to make. Any suggestions?" The marshal smiled. "There's a lot of frontier out there. Places where a woman with your skills could make a difference, not as a killer, but as a protector. Someone who stands between the wolves and the sheep. I am a wolf, maybe, but you're a wolf who remembers being a sheep. That makes all the difference." Ellie strapped on the gun belt, feeling its weight settle against her hips. It felt different now, not lighter, but purposeful in a new way. She attended the execution, standing in the crowd as Morrison and Crowe were led to the gallows. Morrison saw her and tried to speak, but the words were lost as the trapdoor opened. Ellie felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure, just a hollow acknowledgement that this chapter was ending. As the crowd dispersed, a young boy tugged at her sleeve. He couldn't have been more than 8, Mary's age when... "Ma'am," he said, "are you the lady who stopped the bad men?" Ellie knelt to his level. "I suppose I am. My pa says you're a hero, says you saved our farm by stopping Mr. Morrison." "I'm no hero, son. I just did what I had to do." The boy considered this with the seriousness only children can manage. "My ma says sometimes that's what heroes are. People who do what has to be done, even when it's hard." Out of the mouths of babes, Ellie thought. She ruffled the boy's hair, seeing Mary for just a moment in his innocent face. "You take care of your ma and pa, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am." As the boy ran off, Ellie stood and looked west, toward the setting sun and the endless frontier beyond. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond the next sunrise. The woman who'd entered perdition seeking death was gone. The weapon forged in grief and rage remained, but perhaps it could be aimed at more deserving targets. She mounted her horse, a sturdy mare she'd bought with money from the sale of her story to an Eastern newspaper, and rode out of Fort Smith as the sun painted the sky crimson. Behind her lay graves and ghosts, blood and sorrow. Ahead lay uncertainty, possibility, and perhaps, just perhaps, redemption. The widow's ghost was riding into legend, but Ellie Blackwood was riding toward something else. What that was, she didn't know. But for the first time in 6 months, she was curious to find out. As she crested a hill and looked back one last time, she thought she heard something on the wind. It might have been her imagination, or wishful thinking, or maybe, just maybe, it was real. Thomas's voice warm with approval. "That's my girl." And Mary's laughter bright as sunshine. "Mama's a hero." Ellie smiled, the first real smile since that terrible night, and rode on. The sun was setting on one story, but somewhere out there, another was waiting to begin. And this time she'd write it not in blood, but in whatever ink the frontier provided. The woman who'd kicked open the doors of the Broken Wheel Saloon was gone. What rode into the sunset was something new, scarred but not broken, dangerous but not evil, alone but not lonely. She was justice in black leather and determination, mercy with a fast gun and a faster draw. She was Ellie Blackwood, and she was finally, truly, free. Did Ellie's quest for vengeance bring her peace, or did it transform her into something beyond redemption? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this tale of frontier justice stirred something in you, hit that subscribe button.